Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden is expected to speak soon on the terror in Afghanistan. We will bring you a CBS News special report when that happens. Dozens were killed when multiple bombs went off near Kabul's Hamid Karzai airport Thursday. ISIS has claimed responsibility. A warning, the images we are about to show are graphic and some viewers may find them disturbing. The number of American and Afghan civilian victims is unclear, but officials say at least 12 U.S. service members have died, at least 15 were injured. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby confirmed a suicide bomber detonated an explosion at the Abbey Gate southeast of the airport in Kabul. A second one detonated at the nearby Baron Hotel. For over a week, thousands have flocked to Kabul's airport, desperate to leave the country. The White House had hoped to evacuate all U.S. citizens and Afghan allies by August 31st. The State Department asked members of Congress not to direct people to go to the airport at this time. General Frank McKenzie of U.S. Central Command said ISIS would not deter the U.S. from completing its mission in Afghanistan.
We've been clear all along that we're going to retain the right to operate against ISIS in Afghanistan. And we are working very hard right now to determine attribution, to determine who is associated with this cowardly attack, and we're prepared to take action against them. 24/7, we are looking for them.
Meredith McGraw and Kadia Goba join me now. Meredith is a national political correspondent for Politico, and Kadia is a national politics reporter for BuzzFeed News. Welcome to you both. Kadia, let me start with you. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair Bob Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, said this, quote, "As we wait for more details to come in, one thing is clear. We can't trust the Taliban with Americans' security." Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina called on the Biden administration to reopen Bagram Airport as an alternative to Kabul. What else are we actually hearing from lawmakers?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's sort of a mixed bag coming from both sides of the aisle up on the Hill. You have Maggie Hassan, Senator Maggie Hassan, saying that they should extend and complete the mission, no matter what the arbitrary deadlines are. But then you also have Kevin McCarthy, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, suggesting that Congress needs to come back and vote on legislation that makes the president, forbids the president from actually withdrawing. But Speaker Pelosi is pushing back at that, basically saying that the committees in charge will handle that and they'll continue to get, and she's asking for continuous briefing. But we also have members of Congress asking for the resignation of President Biden.
Right. And Meredith, all this is coming as there's some new reporting emerging from Politico. Your colleagues are reporting that the U.S. government provided the Taliban with a list of names of Americans and Afghan allies. Can you talk about that a bit more? What was the reasoning behind that move?
Yeah, my colleagues came out with a really eye-popping report this afternoon that said U.S. officials in Afghanistan were providing the names of U.S. citizens, of green card holders, of allies there, Afghan allies, who are in that outer perimeter of the airport, which is being controlled, its security is being controlled by the Taliban, but that their names were given to the Taliban. And there was immediate outrage following their report, with people saying, you know, how could we be giving the names of these people to the Taliban, someone who has been our adversary, but we're cooperating with now as we try to evacuate, especially because hundreds of Afghan interpreters, people who helped U.S. military, while they were on their mission over there, have been killed, and they've been hunted down by the Taliban. And people are saying this is just making them sitting ducks here by giving a list of all of these names to them. The Biden administration defended their decision to do this. The news of this came during a briefing with members on the Hill earlier this week. And the Biden administration did defend it, saying that this was a way for them to prevent a potential shootout. there at that outer security perimeter. But again, it's raising questions. And as was mentioned earlier, Senator Menendez, saying that we should be skeptical of working with the Taliban here. It just raises more questions about the security on the ground for not only citizens, but our allies who have been helping us all these years.
Yeah, more to come, I'm sure, on that story. Kadia, Congressman Seth Moulton and Peter Meyer were heavily criticized for making a secret trip to Kabul Wednesday. What are they saying now that they've returned?
Well, both of them have had reserves or reservations about their proclamations earlier about the hard deadline. So now it's interesting, like along with the political reporting, Seth Moulton is actually saying or encouraging some kind of working relationship with the Taliban and suggesting that they can only do that if they leave on August 31st, which again, interestingly enough, he was one of the people that was saying, him and one of the members of Congress that was pushing to extend that August 31st deadline. So I think this is something new that we see across or throughout Congress, where people are following the administration's role to or a position to cooperate with the Taliban. And like mentioned, there's a lot of pushback against that because some people are just saying they just don't trust the Taliban. So lots of conflicting ideas on how to move forward here.
Well, Meredith, you have been reporting on former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is believed to be considering a run for the White House in 2024. Republican strategists that you spoke with said that Pompeo, quote, recognizes that his own electoral fate could be directly impacted by how the public perceives the current situation in Kabul. Remind us of the history there, specifically that February 2020 agreement that he helped negotiate with the Taliban. How is he trying to distance himself now from the Afghanistan withdrawal?
Well, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo played a key role in crafting the agreement between the U.S. and the Taliban that outlined how we would withdraw from Afghanistan. And it was a conditions-based agreement that he signed in Doha in February of 2020. But, as all of this has unfolded, Pompeo has been front and center to not only defend the Trump administration's agreement and their decision to ink that deal with the Taliban, but also to criticize the Biden administration's their actions, with this withdrawal that has been messy, that has been chaotic. And, the public blame has so far fallen on President Biden's shoulders. This is his withdrawal from Afghanistan, but there's certainly plenty of blame to go around. And there's been a lot of finger pointing at the previous administration for that agreement. Now, Pompeo has said that the agreement was conditions-based, that if the Taliban was going to retaliate or if it was going to hurt U.S. citizens, that they had contingencies in place and that they would, keep some American troops there on the ground to make sure that first and foremost, all of our military supplies and Americans were evacuated before we officially got out of there. And so he has put a lot of blame on just how the Biden administration has enacted this withdrawal. But he really has been taking a lot of arrows from even Republicans. I spoke with Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, who said that, if Mike Pompeo is planning to run for president, this is certainly something that it could potentially come up in Oppo ads. And it's something that even though his allies said he's not concerned about the political ramifications, there certainly are going to be plenty of political ramifications, not only for him, but of course for President Biden. And one of the things that I did think was kind of interesting when I was talking to folks for this story was that during the crafting of this agreement, the former Secretary of State, I was told, did understand that he could pay a political price for having an agreement here with the Taliban, but he was taking orders from President Trump, and the former president was determined to get out of Afghanistan. And, you know, he was determined to pull out. And as Bolton told me, if the tables were turned here, if Trump was still in office, he would anticipate that Trump would be doing just as Biden is doing now, and withdrawing troops and getting out of there as fast as he could.
Just a quick follow-up, Meredith, because February 2020 was a long time ago. So much has happened since then. Remind us, you point out in your piece what some of the concessions were that were made in exchange for this sort of conditions-based withdrawal. Can you talk about that a bit? Because others have pointed to those concessions as helping or contributing, in their view, to the conditions that we have seen right now.
Well, one of the major ones was we agreed to the release of 5,000 prisoners there in Afghanistan. And there's been a lot of concern about, you know, just who was released. Did that jeopardize security at all? And, you know, also with these deadlines, we made clear that we would be getting out by certain dates. And that's also, you know, a complicated things there on the ground as we try to pull as many Americans out as quickly as we can. There have been concerns, you know, did we go about doing this all too fast? But certainly the fact that all of those Afghan prisoners were released, you know, has called into question. Some Republican strategists brought that up as something that, you know, should be top of mind for somebody like Mike Pompeo or Trump as they're questioned in the future about just how all of this transpired.
Right. And as you point out in the piece as well, the government of Afghanistan was not a party to that agreement, was not part of that negotiation process. And as you say, critics say that undermined the country's leadership and legitimacy. All right, Meredith McGraw and Khadija Goba, thank you both. Oh, go ahead, Meredith.
Oh, no, I was going to say I failed to mention that, and that's a really important piece of all of this. Without including the Afghan government in this, they do feel that undermined not only Afghan military forces, it undermined the morale. It also undermined the leadership over there pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's something that we have heard from service members that we've interviewed here on CBSN who say those Afghan allies that they worked with didn't feel like their higher-ups necessarily had their backs. Meredith McGraw and Khadija Goba, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Christina Ruffini and Steve Dorsey join me now with more. Christina is a CBS News correspondent, and Steve is a CBS News radio correspondent as well as their executive editor. Good to have you both. Christina, I know you have been talking to multiple sources, essentially day in and day out, both Americans, people in Afghanistan. What is the latest that you're hearing on the ground about what is taking place right now in Kabul?
It's pretty much blanket uncertainty, and that goes for Americans, for officials, for Afghans, for civilians. Everyone is just waiting to see what has happened. Now, so far, the Americans, the Pentagon has said the evacuation effort will continue, but it will continue in what form? It will continue with what capacity? Obviously, if they are no longer getting people through the gates, and sources told CBS News earlier today they were welding those airport gates shut, that really curtails their ability, even if they want to continue evacuating Americans, permanent residents, SIVs. And at the moment, that seems to be that as far down on the list as they've been going. Even before this incident, we were hearing that unless you were a U.S. citizen or a U.S. permanent resident, it was getting harder and harder to get through the gates. If they're still trying to do the evacuations, how do they do that now? How do they facilitate it safely, given how dangerous Kabul is, not only around the airport, but elsewhere in the city? We're hearing unconfirmed reports of explosions, of possible disruptions. Now, you know how rumors can fly in a city during a terrorist attack. We've seen that here on our own soil. Sure. So you never know, but it just goes to say people, I don't want to say panicking, but there's a low-grade nervousness in a place that was already tense and already very stressed out about people not knowing what to do, and even people with blue passports not sure if they're going to be able to get out at this point.
Yeah, you know, Steve, there is so much that we don't know right now. But one thing that is clear is that a warning went out Wednesday night advising U.S. citizens to leave the area around Kabul's airport due to an imminent security threat. Do we know what the intelligence was leading up to these explosions?
Well, in that warning to Americans across Afghanistan, the embassy didn't detail that specific threat. But we know the president himself said just days ago he's been briefed on the ongoing threats to the U.S. presence in that country. We know from foreign allies like the United Kingdom that there has been an elevated level of intelligence pointing to threats from groups including ISIS-K, an offshoot of ISIS that includes some former Taliban fighters from Pakistan. And a Defense Department official told CBS News that there has been intelligence to indicate that there was a threat not to the planes taking part in this evacuation mission, but to exactly what we saw today, to the perimeter of this heavily fortified, sprawling airport complex with a risk of explosives being detonated.
Christina, given that climate of fear and uncertainty that you described, I mean, what are officials advising Americans who are still in Afghanistan to actually do? Because considering what we have seen already take place, obviously there are a lot of questions about what the capability would be to extract those Americans from the country.
I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but at the moment I have spoken to at least one American who has heard from the State Department. For the moment, they are being told to stay put. Now, this morning when I spoke to that American, they gave me the impression that something might be in the works. They were very positive. I've spoken to them, and they said the State Department is still communicating with them, but for the moment, they're asking them to stay put. And the reason I reached out to that person is I knew they were heading to the airport today, and when we heard about the explosion, I said, you know, don't go to the airport. And they said, no, the State Department has already contacted me and told me to stay where I am.
Such a tenuous situation. Christina Ruffini and Steve Dorsey, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.